Good morning, World History 2 folks. This is your daily starter for the day. So go ahead and pause me and then write down your question and look up the answer. It'll be in your notes from the previous class. Now that you've written the question down, there's really only two choices for answers. It says, who controls the factors of production? So the factors of production are land, labor, and capital. And in any economic system, who controls those factors of production tells us what kind of economy that they have. So your two choices are, do individuals control them or does the government control them? So in a communist economy, the answer is the government. So in a capitalist economy, what we have in America, it's mostly individuals. In a socialist economy, it's mixed. Some is individuals, some is the government. But in a communist economy like they had in the Soviet Union, which was Russia, based on the teachings of Karl Marx, it was the factors of production controlled by the government. So the answer is the government. So if you need to pause it for a moment to write down your answer, do so. So here's what we're going to do to our day. This is our agenda. You've already done your daily starter. So then you're going to do your imperialism notes, which will continue here. All you need to make sure is you have the notes from the sub to fill in and that you have the headphones to watch the video. You are going to want to actually listen to the video because I will be saying lots of additional stuff that is not in the notes. And it is important that you get that information because we'll be having a test next week on imperialism, nationalism, and the Industrial Revolution. And then the following week when Mrs. Harris is back, we'll be beginning World War I. So you're going to do the notes. It'll take you roughly about 20 minutes. And then you'll be working on the map and timeline. You're going to need color pencils for that. And you're going to turn that in at the end to the sub for a formative grade. And then we're going to be having some geography quizzes over this next quarter to help us review. And geography is always one of our weakest things in world history. And we're going to start with a pretty easy one. We're going to start with continents and oceans, and you'll be labeling that on the map, and that'll be the last thing that you do today. All right, so I'll give you a moment to make sure that you've got everything set and that you're ready to go to fill in your notes. All right, so we are now at the imperialism notes. Imperialism is one of these topics that I enjoy teaching it in the fact that it's one of these things that a lot of people don't know about, but it's also one of the most difficult things that I teach. And this is part of hard history. There are many things in the history of the world, especially here in the United States, that we should not be proud of. And this imperialism, how the Europeans treated the natives of Africa and Asia, this is not something to be proud of. Today we're going to talk about imperialism in general, like what it means, what it is, how it's set up. And then we're going to look next class more specifically at how it impacted Africa and Asia. So the first thing to be thinking about, kind of what is imperialism is when one country seeks to control or dominate another. So that country goes in and takes their resources. So for example, if a country is known for its resources, or let's take like West Virginia. West Virginia is known for its coal. And let's say that Virginia wants that coal. So instead of trading with them, we would go and just take what we want. And maybe the people of West Virginia might fight against us, but we have a larger population and we have a better military, a National Guard, so we could take it. And that's the idea behind imperialism, is that you take from a weaker country and get the resources that you need. Now, a lot of historians will call this the new imperialism because they say the old age of imperialism was during the time of exploration when colonies were initially set up. So let's think about for a minute, what was it that led these Europeans to want to come? Like, why did Christopher Columbus get in a boat and go looking for spices? And if you remember, we came up with a little 3 letters to help us remember, and those were God, glory, and gold. And so those are all about reasons that Europeans were looking to go to these new colonies, why they're coming to South America, why they're going wherever they're going. And so gold obviously is a big one, is money. And that's going to be the major thing we're going to see again. A little bit of God, a little bit of wanting to spread Christianity, and a lot of glory for your country. Remember that this new idea of nationalism is very new. So we have new nations like Germany and Italy, and they're trying to find their place, trying to get some power in this whole situation. The new reasons, we call these the R's. So they're going for resources, revenue, and respect. So resources, we're talking about natural resources. Natural resources that we're going to need to run our factories. Now, Industrial Revolution is one of, if not the major cause of imperialism. Because of the Industrial Revolution, we have more goods to sell, we being Europeans, and we have the need for more goods, or resources. So, for example, if Britain is famous for producing lots of clothes and textiles, they need cotton in order to make that. One of the big resources that countries needed was palm oil. So, palm trees, they don't grow very well in Europe, but they grow in Africa and Asia. And so from those, they could actually take oil, palm oil, and it's actually used to grease the machines. Rubber, we have the new inventions of like bicycles and cars. And so rubber becomes a hot commodity. So resources are really needed. Revenue, everybody still wants to make money. And then the whole respect thing, of course, is bringing respect to your country. So that little top part there, that's where we're going to start filling in some of our blanks on your paper. So our time period, you notice that this is post-U.S. Civil War, and this is right up until World War I. So this is our gap here. As soon as we finish imperialism, we test next week, we're going to start World War I. And one of the causes of World War I is that countries like Germany wanted more colonies. They just didn't have enough, because the people who are really dominating, and you're going to see this when you do your map, is Britain and France. They are the big dominators. Now, notice for the first time we see the United States kind of show up in here. Remember, we had the Monroe Doctrine. We're supposed to be staying out of things. We're staying out of European affairs, but we are interested in what especially is going on in Asia. Japan. How in the world is Japan showing up? Didn't Japan have a policy of isolationism? They didn't want foreigners in their country. Well, the United States sent a fleet, a naval fleet. They were called the White Fleet because they were these beautiful white ships. And the head of them was Commodore Matthew Perry. And they got to Japan. Japan was like, well, we'll kill you like we have everybody else. You can't come in. And the Commodore said, let me show you some of the kind of cool things we have. And so he kind of explained all kind of some of the achievements in the Industrial Revolution. And the Japanese were like, all right, how about you come back in a year? So they left. They come back in a year. They bring the coolest things. Like they literally had a little toy, like good size toy steam engine. And the Japanese were absolutely amazed at what was happening. And so the Japanese are like, we want to get in on this. So the Japanese begin to open up to industrialization, and then they also are going to be part of imperialism. This is going to be one of the major causes of Japan's involvement in World War II. Japan is a country that has very little of their own natural resources. So they have to trade a lot, or they can take it. That's kind of your other option. So how wealthy or how great you were as a country was measured by your colonial possessions. And the country that had the most, that was considered the greatest empire, was the British Empire. And that's how you became an empire, by dominating other countries. And it's really just a has and have not. Strong countries versus weak countries. And the local people were very much taken advantage of during this time period. Just a reminder, at any point, if you need to pause, you can you want to listen, or you want to pause and write down all the notes, and then you want to take a moment to listen. That would be a good idea. So we now have our 4 reasons. So we kind of have a little easy acronym to help us remember kind of what's going on, so that we can keep all of these things straight in our head. And the one we're going to do for imperialism is, what are the main reasons that caused imperialism? And the first is, this is directly related to that Industrial Revolution, the market for goods. So these factories have now produced all of these amazing products, and we got to have people to sell them to. So that's what a market is. We got to have goods to places to sell them. So you have a space to write market for goods, and then you also need to write where the question is under that, Industrial Revolution leads to new products. And so there's all these amazing things that they can't produce in Asia and Africa because they don't have the structure, the support, the factories, the machines that they do in Europe. So all these things that the Europeans are making, they're going to have no problem selling to the people of Africa and Asia. Also, they're limited in what they can sell in Europe. So let's say that Britain makes t-shirts. So Britain makes t-shirts and they go to sell them to France. Well, France already has t-shirts because they're making them in their factories. Plus, the French people don't want to buy British stuff, and their country even makes a special tariff, a tax on anything that's imported. And so then British t-shirts cost more than French t-shirts. So why would you buy them? So the British have to find somebody to sell them to. So our next reason is to acquire. Acquire means to get resources. So again, we need those resources like cotton, which particularly for the British would come from Egypt and India. They're also going to need like the palm oil, the rubber, all those things. We also need coal. I mean, there's a whole litany, a whole list of resources that are needed in order to produce goods. So make sure you also not only fill in acquire resources, but also need raw materials to make products. I'm going to just put out there that at least 90% of the people who are involved in imperialism are pretty bad guys. Okay? That's just how it was. However, there's a small percentage who, when they went to visit these other countries, did so with a good heart. And those were the people who were coming to bring Christianity. Now, there are some people who came to bring Christianity who had no respect for the culture that was already there, and they weren't responded to very well. But for the most part, people went in and tried to witness to the people around them to try to share Christianity. And anybody who tries to spread their faith is called a missionary. In some countries, they were received better than others. Things did not go well in Japan. Things did not go well in China, which we'll talk about later and why that is. They go pretty well in Africa. My actual favorite, one of my favorite people of this time period, because there's so few, like really good guys, I kind of cling to the good guys, is Dr. David Livingstone. He actually was a medical geographer missionary. So he's so cool. He's from Scotland, which I just love. And Dr. Livingstone actually traveled around Africa. He sent these beautiful pictures and descriptions. He would write and send them back to England, and they would be published. He actually found Victoria Falls. And as he went, he was, mapping and talking about the geography. He would also provide medicine and share his faith to the people that he came in contact with. And the sharing of the medicine and helping provide, but just because the knowledge of understanding of medicine was so much better in Europe at this time period. And so bringing that was a definite help to the communities. So the end, we're going to see the main causes of World War I in a few weeks. And the end is always going to be the same. It's nationalism. And remember that nationalism, not only does it mean that people of a common culture and language should be together, but it's also that pride in your country. And so nationalism wants to make countries make them want an empire because every country wants to be the best. And they're all fighting and competing for whatever resources there are that are available. Now, once these countries get into, so like the British and the French, once they get into a place, what do? So there's organization for how things are set up. So there's three types of imperialism. There's a colony, a protectorate, and a sphere of influence. Now, you want to make sure that you're going to write down not only the definition, but an example of each. So let's start with the colony. Probably what we often think of when we think of imperialism. A colony was directly ruled by one country over another. So like when we were the 13 colonies, the British totally ruled over us. For this time period, India is a great example. The British ruled directly over India. Then we have protectorate. So some of you know, you've heard me say, but I lived overseas and taught students like you in Turkey and Morocco. I was in Turkey for 4 years and Morocco in 2. So when I was in Morocco, I spoke just a little bit of Arabic, but mostly I spoke French. And that's because Morocco had been a French protectorate. So that means that the people in Morocco speak French because they used to be controlled by France. Now, a protectorate is not as controlled as a colony. It's a little bit of guidance. So here's how it works. So in Morocco, they have a king. The current king, his name is Mohammed VI. The previous king was his father was Hassan II, and the one before him was King Mohammed V, and so on. It kind of goes back and forth. So the king was allowed to be the king of Morocco, but he had to take advice from the French government. And usually what would happen is the military would come in, the French military, and they would kind of make suggestions. He'd have like an advisor. Now, this is one of those things like, you know how your mom sometimes will like make a suggestion of what she wants you to do, but you know she really wants you to do it and you don't have any choice? That's what we're talking about here. Like they would say, we really would like you to do this, but that means you need to do this. So the British also did this in Egypt. Think about this. Why is Egypt going to be important? Remember where Egypt is. You've got that little connection with the Red Sea, the Sinai Peninsula, and the most important British colony is India. And if you can cut through the Mediterranean down through this Suez Canal into the Red Sea, bam, you're over there in India versus sailing all the way around the tip of Africa. And so, you know, location is going to be very important. They definitely took advantage of colonies in Africa because there's a lot of interior Africa. And they took advantage of colonies that had good river systems or had good trade ports. So a sphere of influence, we actually introduced this term when we talked about China before, and China is hands down the best example of a sphere of influence. So if you remember, China set up enclaves, which were like these little enclosures. So like the city of Hong Kong or Macau, like Portugal, you can trade there. Britain, you could trade here. And so a sphere of influence is that a country like China has trading rights and they would give that away to other countries. So Portugal or Britain or the U.S., we're not controlling China, but each country is wanting to take like a little piece where they could trade. And so kind of a way to think about it is like a street gang. It has a turf, like this is the place that they can like do business on, their corner. This is only the corner that Britain could do business on. So another thing to kind of think about is why is it that the Europeans are so successful? And the fact is, it's two things. One, that the African and Asian nations were a lot weaker. And it's horrible to say this, but some of these older civilizations, specifically like Ming China or the Ottoman Empire, really had just declined. And they weren't the great empires that they were before. Then poor Africa, you think about the triangular trade and the effect that slave trade has had on them. Not only do you have tribal wars, but who's in charge? Like you have weakened the entire structure of the continent of Africa. Africa, poor Africa, there are 54 countries in Africa today. I think 55 now in South Sudan. Only two managed to keep Europeans from taking over their country. Only two. Liberia and Ethiopia were the only two countries that managed to remain independent. Now, what is it that the Europeans bring in that make them so successful? Well, obviously, they've got strong economies, so they have the money, the backing, they have very strong organized governments, but the military might really makes a big difference. There was this famous quote, whatever happens, we have the Maxim gun and they have not. And if you look down in the corner there, that is the Maxim gun, which obviously looks kind of like an automatic weapon. And that's what the Maxim gun was. And you can imagine a Maxim gun against spears. Like it just doesn't have the same impact. And even though guns had begun to be traded, as we know, like guns were one of the things that were traded during triangular trade, even a single reloadable rifle is no match for these machine type guns, kind of this first machine gun. Not to mention that Europeans are the only ones who have a navy at this point. The Chinese had gotten rid of their navy. And then on top of that, just in general, the medicine, like even if they get hurt, like how can they treat themselves? Like it's just better medicine and understanding all of those things. So it's really kind of this sad thing that we see what is happening here. So one of the things that I would suggest that you do, you may even want to like have it playing in the background while you're working on your worksheet, but I would suggest that you watch this imperialism crash course. I'm going to put this below my video so that you can watch that. So what you need to do now is you need to go to the sub and tell them that you need the timeline and map. I would do the map side first. Read the directions, and then it's basically, it tells you Great Britain controlled, and then it has a whole list of countries, and you have to find the countries and color them in. I promise you, all the countries are there. One of them, I think it says to color it in gold, and I don't imagine you probably have a gold color pencil. So just mark that out and make it a different color that you're not using, like maybe purple or something like that. And then after you finish that, you're going to turn in the other work that you might be missing, and then you're going to grab your continence question. And everything is on Classroom. There's a link there and a list if you have any questions.